some more reading out of Taken Inside Alien Human Abduction Agenda by Karla Turner Ph.D. And yeah, a higher side chat. That's something you should definitely follow. Greg Carlson's doing some good work, as always, and he just interviewed Hugo Newman, New Discoveries of the Gobekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe and other ancient sites. Interesting conversation. There's overwhelming evidence that the Earth is a lot older than 6,000. Another deception coming out of the religion. We're now subject 5, Aneta. Aneta's experiences, well, not all, but not so intense and frequent as Lisa's, are probably more akin to what most abductees witness and recall. They include a number of details commonly reported in other cases, but in her situation, typically of these others, conscious memories of events have been less frequent and more moderate in scope. Her attitude similarly reflects this moderate quality, possibly because she's been able to reflect upon her experiences with quite equanimity. Let's figure out what that word means, so we don't presume that we know what we're talking about. Equanimity? I think that's probably what it means.
Equanimity.
Mental calmness, composure, evenness of temper. So, equanimity. Anyways, born in 1947, Aneta has spent most of her life in Texas. Her ancestry is French, Scotch, and Native American. A wife, mother, and grandmother, she is attractive and intelligent. For a while, she was a trained volunteer emergency medic, and later she owned and operated her own business. From her home in a large central Texas city, Aneta now takes care of her family and also pursues several intellectual interests. In the past several years, for instance, she has been drawn to the study of psychic and alternative methods of healing. Aneta has been consciously aware of UFO activity since childhood, and her brothers and sisters have also had recurrent UFO events throughout their lives. So perhaps may have some of Aneta's children and grandchildren. Her first conscious encounter with an unknown was at the age of 5. I recall sitting in my front yard one afternoon, she said, and sensing someone watching me, I turned around, and back behind me stood a man in a red flight suit. I have no memory of what happened after that. Like many abductees, what she recalled from childhood was frequently unexplained, but not necessarily related to UFOs. The nature of events remains ambiguous. Episodes of missing time, which have reoccurred throughout her life, began at the early age. She recalled one such episode that happened at the family home, which was in a very rural setting. I suddenly came out of what I called mind blank, and then it explained I found myself close to a creek near our house. I did not know how I got there, The strangest thing was that I was clothesless and shoeless. It was a miserably cold day. Interesting, I wonder how much it was. While these two events in isolation do not necessitate a UFO-based explanation, in the context of Annette's lifelong experiences, they prove to be very typical of abduction patterns. And the third consciously remembered event from her childhood did bring UFOs into the picture. When I was 12, Annette reported, my brother shouted one night for me to come and look out the window. I did, and just above the tree line, about a quarter of a mile from our house, was a large band of beautiful lights moving from west to east. They appeared to be all on one craft. My brother was around 10 at the time. He said it was a UFO. There was no sound, and we had our windows open. Annette and others in her family have continued to have UFO sightings from time to time. Her older brother, for instance, who is a long-distance truck driver, has reported a number of sightings, especially in the southwest part of the country. Although elsewhere as well. She tells of a time he and his wife had stopped on the highway somewhere up and around Nebraska to get some sleep. Annette related, they were awakened by a very bright light shining down on them. They got out to see what it was, but couldn't because the light blinded them. They said it didn't make any noise, and that it was, and that is what frightened them. They jumped back in the truck and headed to Scotts Bluff, whatever it was, it followed them all the way. For Annette, the strange experiences continued into her adulthood. In 1970, she lived in Houston for a while. It was there that a number of events occurred. The most traumatic and terrifying was in 1972, when, at age 25, Annette had her second encounter with a man in the red suit. As in the initial meeting, this occurred in the daytime when Annette was conscious. But as in most abductions, her state of mind was soon altered as the strangers intruded into her home, took control of the situation. She was lying on a living room couch when she became aware of the presence there with her, and instantly her mind was clouded. She saw a man who appeared human-looking and everywhere bend over her. I have never experienced such terror in my life, Annette said. It was like a demon, and that I knew the human was raping my body, but I did not feel anything at all. The rapist had not come alone. I could see maybe 3 others, Annette reported, standing by the table, but it was like seeing them through frosted glass. I could make out their bodies and the red suits, but could not really see any details. She has no idea, therefore, if the other figures were human-looking, like the rapist, or alien. She does remember that after the forced intercourse, the red suit man spoke to her about something, but the only communication that stayed with her consciously was his statement, I'll be there to help you. Annetta does not remember what may have happened after that, but as soon as she was aware that the men were gone, she reacted in a very conscious state of mind. I was so terrified, she said, that I grabbed my children and got out of the house immediately. The trauma of the event had disturbing effects on Annetta for a very long time. It was very embarrassing to say this, she confided, but after the experience, I started wearing a tampon 24 hours a day so they couldn't do it again, as if that would stop them. Not long after the assault, Annette experienced a relocation event, presumably with the congruent missing time. At one moment, she was conscious of being in a certain location, and then the next moment, without any sense of having lost consciousness, Annetta found herself returning to awareness and being in a different place. I was on my way to the grocery store, she recalled, and came to a stop sign. There were no other cars in sight in any direction. I started to turn the corner. The next thing I remember is snapping out of my mind blank and being in a different location on West Road. I looked in my rear view mirror and there was a car parked on the road that wasn't there. When I had stopped at the sign moments before. Although the location was different, she did not notice a time loss. In 1977, while still living north of Houston area, Annetta had a UFO sighting that was witnessed by one of her friends. I was outside late one night talking with a friend, she said, when I glanced up and saw a large orange globe in the north. Her friend, who was in his car, took off in pursuit of the object and reported on his return that he eventually lost sight of it near the state highway, a state highway. It was also during this period that Annetta had two other experiences that are frequently reported by abductees. One of these is in the presence of small lighted objects in the home, usually near a wall or the ceiling, that seem to function as some sort of remote probe or monitor. This first event occurred during the middle of the night when something awoke Annetta. Looking around, she recalled, I saw a multicolored triangle moving against my bedroom wall. She could see that the object had a device or design in its center, where pink, orange, and other colors were moving around. Her reaction to this strange sight reflects a maddening yet typical response that abductees report in such situations. Instead of reacting with surprise, curiosity, or even consternation, as would a person whose mind was not being controlled, her response was quite passive. I thought, a mandala, how pretty, she said. Then I just went back to sleep. This is apparently a program response that other abductees report. It has proven usual to precede an encounter. If anything else occurred that night with Annetta, however, she had no memory, conscious or dreamlike, of further activity. The other experience was much more physical and less directly tied to alien intrusion. It has been reported, however, to occur following abduction events in a number of other people's situations. Annetta developed a rash which seemed to have no mundane cause. It rapidly covered almost her entire body, and a doctor she consulted could not give her an explanation. It looked like I had snake skin, she described. It took 6 weeks to go away. The pattern of activity in Annetta's life thus far had shown occasional intrusions and sightings, but in the late 1980s, the activity noticeably began to increase. The timing may be accidental, as many abductees woke up to the fact of their encounters in 1886 through 88. Huh, really? I graduated in the middle of that from high school. Although at the time Annetta wasn't aware of the implications. This new phase of her involvement may have been marked by a possible missing fetus episode in 1985, when she began experiencing some suspicious physical symptoms. She consulted her doctor and was very surprised to discover she was pregnant. Having already raised a family of 3 children, and considering her age, she decided to terminate it, but the results of the operation proved to be as surprising as the unexpected pregnancy itself. I went to have an abortion, she said. After my OB-GYN, or GYN, I guess it is, OB-GYN, assured me that I was pregnant. He reported the procedure and said that he would not find any fetal tissue at all. He was as puzzled as I was. Whether this was one of the by now familiar procedures of aliens implanting a fetus and then returning to retrieve it from the host mother, Annetta has not been able to determine. But since that episode and up until the present, there have been a number of experiences in which the aliens are clearly involved. She has seen them in conscious glimpses and flashbacks and remembered events and dreams. She has engaged in telepathic conversations with some groups of entities, at times generated by them, at times by her, and as usual, there have been peripheral and confirming external evidence in some instances. Among the types of non-human entities Annetta has encountered are the ubiquitous grays, another group she calls the tans, a blue creature, and an off-white creature whose skin she describes as dry and leathery, in addition to the humanoids in the red suits. Although she is conscious of a single event involving the Greys, Annetta came away from the experience with a definite idea about the creature's attitude towards her. As far as the Greys go, she said, I have only one memory of an encounter. It was not pleasant. In this sketchy recollection, Annetta was inside what appeared to be a typical craft. She was being escorted through a corridor without any sense of the destination or of any preceding scenario. There was the feeling of dislike on the part of one of the Greys who was leading me down the corridor, she recalled. I mean, he didn't like me or just didn't like humans. It was as if he had a somewhat distasteful function to perform. By the way, she said, this dude had a short, squatty looking blue creature with him. I nicknamed him Grimace. Like so many others in these situations, with no accurate, authoritative explanations or sources to help them understand the aliens and their activities, Annetta has had to invent her own terms and phrases. The nickname above is one such example, as is the name Tan, when she uses for the particular group of entities. Describing these same entities, other abductees have used any number of different names because no one name has yet been established as the proper one. Annetta has recalled several encounters with the Tan group in the past few years. She said that they are very similar in appearance to the creature in the drawing on Whitley Strieber's Communion, which, according to other abductees, is more like what they would call a Grey. But Annetta clearly distinguishes between the Grey creature that was leading her down the corridor in one encounter and the Tans, with whom she is more familiar. When I first saw their picture on the book cover, she said I immediately thought, hello, little friend. I know that for some reason I feel protective to them. Her relationship with the Tans, unlike her one impersonal encounter with the Grey, involves a different degree of intimacy. Apparently, as part of their deliberate programming of the abductee, I have never since disliked that I did with the Grey. Annetta reported, the Tans seem to be very concerned with making us feel love for them. Interesting. Love for them, huh? But Annetta has proven to be quite aware of this psychological manipulation on the aliens' part and has thus been able to see through some of their intentions and motivations. I called one Tan, looking into my eyes. She described from an encounter and making me feel extreme love for him. I put my hands on his face and said, too bad it isn't real, meaning the feeling of love that he was projecting into my soul. Indeed, in spite of the aliens' intentions to convey such a caring relationship, Annetta has continued to suffer much of the same anxiety that other abductees report. When I said I felt protective towards the little critters, she cautioned, please believe that it is a feeling induced by them. The rest of the time, all I feel is apprehension during the day and dread going to bed at night. This anxiety very often causes disruptions of the abductee's sleep patterns, usually occurring nightly at approximately the same time. As happened with Annetta, I do still get scared sometimes, she confessed, and I still wake up around 3 to 3:45 a.m. and huddle under the covers, frightened, and lie there with my eyes glued to the bedroom door. This stress response, according to mental health professionals who have studied such situations, shows up in cases where an actual traumatic event has occurred. It may be that abductees continue to wake up at a certain time each night because a traumatic event had occurred previously at that time, as if a preventative warning, a wake up and protect yourself alarm, is sounding subconsciously. The ongoing feelings of fear and intrusion are fostered not only by the consciously recalled encounters, but also by situations in which external evidence points to unremembered events. For instance, without any conscious memory of a disturbance or problem associated with the area, Annetta has a phobia about driving alone along a certain stretch of U.S. Highway 287. There is, however, a possible connection with her alien involvement. This stretch of highway is where my older brother called us to look out the window one night. She said to see a UFO going over a treetop level, at treetop level. And although she remembered nothing further about that night, her phobia about that area is suspicious. So are the various marks and injuries she has discovered on her body. Lots of mornings, Annetta says, I have gotten up feeling like someone beat me up in my sleep. This is another common abductee report. Waking up with sore, damaged feeling muscle and joints. Damaged feeling muscles and joints. I have waked up with bruises on my arms, shoulders, legs, and she continues with no idea where they came from. I have found scratches that I could not remember having gotten the day before. The evidence of vigorous physical activity during the night, although unremembered, comes from more than just Annetta's sore or scarred body. However, in one instance, she woke up in the morning and felt an unfamiliar pain in her right hand. I sat up in bed, she explained, and found that sometime during the night my ring had been squashed on my finger. She managed with effort to remove the ring, but neither her husband nor a jeweler could completely restore its original shape. On another occasion, Annetta got out of bed one morning and found a crucifix from her necklace lying on the floor. It had been on my neck the night before, she said, and the chain was still on me. But the only way to remove the crucifix is to remove the necklace and take it off the chain. Here go the connection with the Christianity and Jesus again. She has also awakened several mornings to discover that something had happened to her clothing, a report frequently echoed by other abductees. In one incident, she woke up with her nightie on backwards, although she was certain she had not taken it off, turned it around, and put it back on. And on a different occasion, she found that the nightie was not only backwards, but had also been turned inside out. And the night during one of these events, she had an altered state experience in which she recalled a group of tan aliens observing her as she was free-falling, an event which did not feel unduly upsetting for some reason. Annetta had quite a severe reaction to another similar event, however, venting much more emotion than the situation seemed to call for. It was in the winter, during the Christmas holidays. One night, she had worn socks to bed for extra warmth. Then she woke up the next night and found that one of her socks was missing. Annette became extremely upset and angry with her family. She said she was very belligerent towards them, even accused them of playing a practical joke on her. One which didn't strike her as humorous. Annetta was also physically upset that morning, suffering from a violent headache and nauseous, which caused her to vomit. Yet there was no illness that accounted for the symptoms. Still, she might not have been overly concerned about the vanished sock and her physical problems if her young granddaughter hadn't made a disturbing comment. The 7-year-old child told her grandmother that some mean men that had come in and taken her away during the night. When Annette asked her to describe the mean men, the little girl called them the mushroom men. "What are the mushroom men?" Annetta asked. Her granddaughter then found the Book of Missing Time by Bud Hopkins and pointed to the drawing on the cover. Annette asked the girl to make a drawing on her own. It showed a long-necked humanoid being with a head shaped like an inverted light bulb. The eyes were black, large, and slanted. The nose had 2 nostril holes. The mouth was a straight, thin line, and the chin was more rounded than in the drawing of the cover of Missing Time. The girl said the creatures were about a foot tall, the gray-skinned, and had 4 fingers rather than 5. A detail not apparent in the cover picture. There were quite a few of these entities present, she said. Annetta remembered nothing strange that night herself, but the physical symptoms, the missing sock, and her granddaughter's story were indicative enough for an intrusive incident to be of great concern. She not only wanted to know what had gone on during the night, but she wanted to know more in general about these beings who had been part of her life for so long. So she decided to try meditating and sending out messages to the aliens. I would ask a question telepathically, Annetta explained, and then lie down on the sofa to drift into twilight sleep, which is really just a deep state of relaxation. I wasn't asleep or awake. Then the answers to my questions would come. She remembered, for instance, asking, "Why are you taking human women?" To ensure quality breathing, the answer came back. To ensure quality breeding, the answer came back. "What about when a woman is menstruating?" she inquired, thinking about how she had used a tampon to try to fend off any of the rapists in the past. "We know the difference," she was told. When are you going to show yourselves? She questioned further, but the reply was less than specific. The time is almost right, was all she received. Annetta had used this meditative method for communication several other times. When I decide to telepath to them, she commented, I spent a good part of the time berating them for not being honest to the human race. They've always been here. If they had shown themselves at all, no one would fear them. It's the unknown that causes fear. Now they've made it impossible just to be accepted. I know who I'm yelling at, she added, but I have no idea which group is sending back answers. And some of those answers have been impossible to understand. In addition to the communications which made some sort of sense, it only works when the year arrives and transmogrify. For example, Annetta has also gotten messages containing unknown words and meaningless phrases, including one puzzling reference, the star planet Phil. Some of these messages look like nonsense, but one of the other odd communications, URI, is very similar to a message given to Lisa, in which she was told by the aliens referring to some ape-type creatures, they are you are them. If the capital letters of Annetta's communication are written out as words, it would read, I are you are I. The import of this phrase is clearly similar. Even the grammar is incorrect in both cases. As with most abductees, Annetta cannot explain even to herself just what the aliens are doing with her. She certainly doesn't accept all the communications and encounters as objectively real. I suppose that a lot of these encounters are alien-induced dreams, she commented, for the purpose of making you feel comfortable with them. As for the controlled freefall, I think they were creating an enjoyable flying experience for me because I have a horror of flying, and it may be necessary in the future to fly with them when the planet tilts in order to save my life. Of course. End of the world again. Her reference to the planet tilting comes from a scenario she has been shown involving future global catastrophe. So future global catastrophe. Such scenarios are so common among abductees that this type of information may well be part of the widespread programming included in the alien agenda designed to serve some purpose which is not yet clear. And most of the abductees who are told about the coming destruction also report, as does Annetta, feeling that they will have a job or task to perform in conjunction with the catastrophe. It is like I have always known that these things, UFOs, aliens, and the predicted destruction are coming, Annetta told me, and that I must try to convince people and also learn things that would help not only my own survival afterwards, but I must also be able to help other survivors. For instance, I was told as a child that children must be protected. Annetta then admits that at least part of the alien programming has been an effect on her, but she doesn't let herself accept everything they tell her and show her. I am always amazed when I get any information from them at all. She said, I really don't know if someone who would abduct a person could be trusted to give a truthful answer to any question. She is aware of their possible deceptions, just as she realizes that the aliens are capable of creating unreal scenarios for humans during encounters. This awareness has served Annetta well, for it has allowed her to push the alien activity away from her a little, as it were, in order to analyze and assess the events to which she has been subjected. It also has kept her from jumping to conclusions about some of the things she has remembered. One recent possible event, for instance, Annetta describes as a regular dream in spite of the presence of UFOs in the scenario. I dreamt last night that I was standing on my back in my backyard and looking up into the night sky, she told me. I saw a rectangular UFO sitting poised about 500 feet above the house. It had rockets on the side and started flying at a line of trees fairly close to the house. I ran inside and my doorbell rang. And one recent possible event, for instance, Annetta describes as a regular dream in spite of the presence of UFOs in the scenario. I think I just read this right, but I'm going to read it again. I dreamed last night that I was standing in my backyard and looking up in the night sky. She told me I saw a rectangular UFO sitting poised about 500 feet above the house. It had rockets on the sides and started firing at a line of trees fairly close to the house. I ran inside and my doorbell rang. She said in the next segment of the dream involved a scene in which she and I were together discussing about the book project. But after that, a very different episode occurred. Next, she said, I was visited by some military sorts who were trying to get me to tell them about UFOs. I refused. I kept saying, I know nothing, I know nothing. I-K-N-N-K-I. I know nothing, nothing, no I. I just made that up, Barlow. Annetta dismissed this scenario as a mundane dream, which it may well have been, probably in part because my presence in one of the segments. What she didn't know, however, is that what I in fact had seen was that I in fact had seen a rectangular UFO at very close range in the winter of 2092. So my own curiosity was aroused by her description. Even more interesting was the fact that several other people in the book project, Lisa, Angie, and a member of my family have reported very similar situations to the military interrogations. And in these other cases, there was reason to believe they were not normal dreams at all. For Annetta, however, the evidence of the dream's reality was not very strong, which is indicative of her tendency not to overreact to possible or actual alien encounters. As a result, she has managed to keep a good sense of mental balance, neither overly exalting the creatures in her mind, making gods out of them, nor being overwhelmed by terror as if they were demons. Not all the aliens are bad, she believes, which is a reasonable point of view given the cumulative experiences she has had. Still, when they basically intrude into her normal reality, Annetta is not happy about it, as her description of 2 typical episodes show. When I went to bed, she said, I started feeling apprehensive. I couldn't go to sleep. It got worse as the hours passed. Finally, I turned on the bedside lamp to read. I had not been reading long when I saw a flash of light in the den. I started thinking, oh geez, no. I told myself that maybe it was the light in one of my aquariums, and I tried to read some more. I started hearing a clicking noise, she continued, and tried to figure out what it was. And then I saw, in my peripheral vision, a flash of brown go past my door towards the bathroom. The flash of brown was recognizable as to Annetta. She realized that at least one of the aliens was in the house. She fought to stay alert, hoping to fend off another abduction, but she couldn't do it. Finally, she concluded, in sheer fatigue, I give up and fell asleep. They really are patient little critters. If anything occurs after that, Annetta couldn't recall, but she woke with a possible sign that she had indeed been paid a visit. On Saturday morning, she said, my knees and legs were in terrible pain. I have been checked for arthritis and don't have it. 4 months later, in December 1993, a similar incident occurred. A fleeting and occasionally elusive as the first one, I woke up around 3:30. That fateful hour. 3:30 is my story too. She told me and turned on the television set, except it was with a possible Sasquatch or a shadow man or being as well could be. A tall black shadow figure, hooded when they hooded once. And it turned on the television set in the bedroom. This is usually the time I wake up and scan the bedroom for whatever. I turn on channel 4 because they are on all night, and I wanted to catch the weather report because we were expecting sleet. Everything was normal until an insurance commercial came on. I was lying on my side, just happened to glance up at the TV. At that moment, a black object moved in front of the screen, left to right, and then moved back off, right to left. It had a face. After the flash, it appeared to be one-dimensional. It was almost as though you could stick your hand through it, but you could not see the TV screen through the blackness. It must have had intelligence, because as soon as I thought, what the hell is that, it moved back off the screen. I was fighting to stay awake, as if it wouldn't bother me if I were awake. Shortly thereafter, I felt the old familiar zap through my body, and I was out of it. When she had having out-of-body experiences. Since that time, I have had a sore or spot on my spine 8 or 12 inches up from my coccyx. I've had everyone check my spine, and they tell me there isn't even a red spot there. However, it sorry with this. It remained very sore for the past 3 weeks. A conscious sight of a strange creature, an unexplained physical effect, and nothing in her memory to connect the two. Such events have punctuated her life as they have countless others with alien contact. The alien abductions are something she lives with very quietly, rarely discussing them with others, coping with her fears and uncertainties as best as she can on her own. The experiences have changed her views, her habits, and her desires and fears. The whole texture of her life is interwoven with the pattern of an unknown agenda. Probably a good place to stop. And I think I'm getting the gist of this book, but I don't want to give up on it yet. But it reminds me an awful lot of what other people, including myself, experience. Okay. Get back to the reading. We're talking now about Beth. This would be number 6. I guess chapter 6. Is she the 6th one? I can't remember now. Anyways, when I was 7 or 8 years old, Beth related, my father gave us permission, my sister and me, to go outside and play with the other children who were playing hide and seek. It was close to 6 in the evening. I remember that I went to hide between some bushes, and then I heard a sound and somebody else. And as I turned, I saw what I thought at the moment was one of the other kids. The next thing I knew, she continued, it was dark. I was very surprised. When I got home, my father was very mad at me, and my mother was very upset. My father told me that they had been calling me and looking for me for an hour, but I couldn't understand it, she said. The place we was hiding was less than 100 feet from the front of the house. I was hiding there. It was daylight, and then the next thing I knew, it was dark, and I was scared. Recently, I had another memory about that. She added that kid I thought was there, he was an alien. He was one of the Greys. He took me to a ship. I don't remember what happened after that. As I listened to Beth's account of her childhood missing time episode, I was reminded of a similar event in my husband's past. At the age 12, not much older than Beth had been, Casey and his best friend were playing in a field one day when several strange children approached them and asked if they wanted to come see the UFO that had landed on the other side of the hill. Casey's next conscious memory was of coming back home and complaining to his mother that his nose was very, very sore and that he had a headache. As did Beth, Casey had a daytime missing time episode initiated after a contact with unknown children. Beth has never explored this memory hypnotically, but when Casey used regressive hypnosis, it delved into the missing time. He retrieved memories of an onboard abduction involving a nasal implant. This was not the only similarity between Beth's experiences and Casey's. A divorced mother with grown children, Beth had first contacted us, in fact, because another of her encounter memories involving apparently military personnel and contained very striking, disturbing parallels to an incident described in Into the Fringe. A mutual acquaintance helped arrange a phone conversation for us, and we got acquainted. Beth was born in 1942 in Puerto Rico and has lived there most of her life. Although her heritage also includes ancestors from Spain and Vermont, Beth was a teacher before starting her family. But in recent years, she had vision problems which have kept her from working. Currently, she divides her time between Puerto Rico and Florida. Beth and I discussed her memories of the military encounter at length, but I was also interested to hear about that didn't make any sense. I was trying for her other experiences. Okay. That's how it's written. Anyways, what's going on? Especially since she lived in Puerto Rico. A great deal of UFO and alien activity has been reported in the past several years. Much of it is in the area where Beth lived wait a minute. What the hell happened here? A great deal of UFO and alien activity had been reported in the past several years. Much of it in the area where Beth lived, but all over the island as well. Okay, I would have said it differently. Okay, in fact, all the U.S. territory, there may well have been more recent UFO activity in Puerto Rico than anywhere else. To judge from Beth's account, it has probably been going on for quite a while. In addition to the early missing time event, she has conscious memories of many other strange experiences from childhood, well back into the 1950s. Her first UFO sighting, for example, occurred only a year or two after the hide-and-seek episode. Beth was walking to the store in the late afternoon when she looked up and saw a huge ball of fire. Great balls of fire, huh? Tearing downward through the sky. I disappeared behind a nearby mountain. It disappeared behind a nearby mountain. A nearby mountain, and Beth assumed that she'd just witnessed a plane crash, although she heard no sound. Jesus criminy. She screamed and ran back across the road. In the house, where excitedly she told her father what she had seen. Since he worked for the U.S. Navy at the time, her father told her he would inquire around the military base and find out what exactly had happened. But a few days later, when Beth brought up the subject again, her father told her that she must never tell anyone about what she has seen or ever mention it again. No explanation was given, only a warning, and that made Beth believe some sort of mystery must have been involved. She was used to mysterious things, even at a young age. Even before that, she said, as far back as I can remember, I was warned, and so was my family, that strange things were happening to me, most of them at night. I was warned, so was my family, that strange things were happening to me, most of them at night. It made me afraid to go asleep, afraid that someone was going to come for me. Unexplained noises often broke the silence of the night. Once, for example, Beth was startled awake by a buzz, a whooshing sound, in the room where she was sleeping alone. Frightened, she ran into her sister's room. They are looking for me. I was all she remembered saying, because at that moment her sister suddenly fell into a deep sleep and Beth's body became paralyzed. Then she too lost consciousness. Another anomalous event took place when she was 10 years old. Beth had been outside for a while and had stopped to eat a piece of fruit. She consciously remembered standing still, taking a bite, and then looking down at a large bleeding gash in her leg. I didn't know what to think, she said. How could my leg be cut and bleeding? I had not even moved from that spot, heedless of the time. I said heedless or needless of the... Heedless. Is that the word she meant to say? Heedless of the time, as children often are. She had no idea if any was missing. I guess she didn't mean that. So heedless of time as a child. Okay. She also didn't know what to think of the shadowy figures that sometimes appeared in the house, although she tended to believe they might be ghosts. On one occasion, though, the figures seemed very real. Beth woke up during the night and found a humanoid figure sitting on her bed. He was wearing a tight white outfit, and he proceeded to talk to her. She couldn't remember, however, any of the things he said, and she couldn't remember his face. Beth told her mother about some of these strange occurrences. Her mother replied that she had sometimes heard Beth in her room at night, apparently talking to someone, but when she tried to get up and check on the girl, her mother said she was paralyzed. A little later, at age 14, Beth had a second UFO sighting as she sat studying on the stairs by a window. She glanced out and saw an object through the trees. It stopped. For a moment and hovered before shooting off vertically out of sight. I've seen that one before. Beth learned later that one of their neighbors had also spotted the object. Even when she moved away from that house and stayed for a while after her father's death in a boarding house, the unexplained occurrences followed her. One of her roommates there woke her up once, screaming, saying that she'd just seen a weird creature standing beside her Beth's bed. The being apparently noticed the roommate looking at it, because it started moving towards her, and that was when she screamed. Her description of the creature matched today's well-known gray entity. The odd events seemed to subside as Beth grew to adulthood. She went to college and then began working as a teacher. Nothing notable happened until she was married and pregnant with her second child. I remember that I was so afraid that I wasn't pregnant, Beth said, that it was a tumor because the fetus, was not moving. I told my doctor frequently that it couldn't be a child, that he was mistaken, but it was a big joke to him. When I was almost 6 months into pregnancy, I was very worried because the baby wasn't moving. One night I remembered that I suddenly felt so sleepy and that I got in bed and had a dream. I saw myself on the doctor's table. A strange doctor put a needle in my navel. When he did this, I felt something like an electric shock, and the baby started moving. I also felt that something was put up my nose, and then I woke up. She concluded, and when I woke up, I was having a very heavy nosebleed, and the baby was moving. Beth carried the baby to term. It was born healthy, but a subsequent pregnancy, a few years later, didn't survive. Beth apparently miscarried one night and isn't sure if she saw any fetal tissue. This occurred, it should be noted, on a night when one of the neighbors reported seeing an unexplained light over Beth's home. Whatever she may have thought about these numerous and often nebulous events through the years, whoever she might have thought was behind them, in the summer of 1978, an event occurred that left no doubt of its source. On the night of July 17th, Beth went to bed around 9 p.m. where she read for an hour and then turned off the bedside lamp, planning to go to sleep. In the dark, a light caught her attention through the window, where she saw a glowing object. Concerned, Beth woke up her husband and had him check the area. He came back to bed having found nothing unusual, and then turned out the light again to sleep. But the light returned to the yard and shone it through the window. Beth looked at the light, and the next moment she was aware of being somewhere very different. She was in an unfamiliar round room. She wasn't alone. Her husband lay near her apparently asleep, as was her youngest child nestled in her lap. In a panic, she suddenly thought, "Where are my children?" A voice from an unseen source then replied, "Don't be afraid. They are here." 3 other people whom Beth didn't know were also unconscious in the room. She saw a young man and woman, probably in their 20s, and an older man who looked to Beth to be like an ex-military sort. Like her father, maybe? The whole situation was so unexpected that Beth was too bewildered to react logically. Perhaps, as in other reports, her response were directed for some purpose. At any rate, when she noticed the older man, coming to consciousness, just as she was regaining her own awareness, Beth inexplicably asked, "What time is it?" Given the total strangeness of their situation, such a question appears ludicrous. But instead of reacting with surprise or panic, the man simply checked his watch and replied, 10 after 12. Almost 2 hours had passed since she saw the light for the second time, although to her it seemed as if it had only been a few moments. Looking around, she saw strange computer-like equipment in the room, and then she noticed some other beings, clearly not human, there with her. The 2 entities were gray and very skinny, dressed in metallic silver suits. Beth saw that her husband was starting to come around then, but her attention was caught by a startling change in the metal wall in front of her, as it seemed to transform into glass, like a window. Looking out, where do these damn balls come from? I don't know where these freaking flower moths are coming from. It's like always one shows up. I don't know. Got distracted by a freaking moth in the middle of my place. It's freaking December. Anyways. Where was I? Metallic. And the 2, okay. She noticed the other, okay, let's go back to this. Almost 2 hours had passed since she saw the light the second time, although to her it seemed as if it only happened a few moments. Looking around, she saw strange computer-like equipment in the room, and then she noticed some of the beings, clearly not human, there with her. 2 entities were gray and very skinny and dressed in metallic silver suits. Beth saw her husband was starting to come around then, but her attention was caught by a startling change in the metal wall in front of her, as it seemed to transform into glass, like a window. This is important, I think, right here. Looking out, she recognized the location as the rural area near some property she owned. The door opened just then, and a very tall man walked in. He was pale, with dark, short hair that formed a window peak in the center of his forehead. His eyes were larger than usual. His jaw was very square. The man wore a same tight silver outfit as the Greys, but he also had on gloves and a wide belt. In his hands was a small orb that looked to be made of glass. There's the orbs. within which many lights were brightly blinking. As the tall man stared at Beth, and her family, she got the impression that he was perhaps a scientist. She felt he was one in command. His gaze made her feel like a specimen or a guinea pig. My husband was starting to wake up. Beth said, and this man put him back to sleep by holding the glass ball over his head. He did it to me, too, and then I was paralyzed. Beth was next aware of being back in her bed with a terrible headache, and then she fell quickly to sleep. Upon waking, she discovered that the night's events had left her in a bad physical state. Besides the pounding headache, she also suffered aches throughout her body, especially in her back. She was dizzy. Beth was also very nauseated, vomiting especially, vomiting repeatedly, as well as plagued with diarrhea. But could this have been all the reasons for the hallucination? I don't know. She had difficulty seeing because her eyes were badly swollen and irritated, a condition that bothered her for a long time after this, so much so that she had to wear sunglasses. Well, what would her husband say? That's what I want to know. A terrible rash persisted for 2 months, and her hair began to fall out in excessive quantities. Wow, radiation poisoning? Most disturbing of all, however, were the cataracts that began forming in her eyes. 9 months after the abduction, Beth had to undergo cataract removal surgery, and it was during preparatory exams that the doctor found physical scarring from what he insisted was previous eye surgery. But Beth had never had an operation, at least not by human hands. Clearly, there had been some activity in that strange environment. That caused her numerous afflictions. But Beth could only recall the brief scenario in the round room. She wasn't sure about the tall, dark-haired man, but she was certain that the gray being was not human. Not long after this, Beth once again saw one of the strange creatures. She had been asleep, but the sound of something calling her name woke her up. She got up and looked out the window, where one of the little beings was looking back at her. Beth remembered that he was holding a metal stick of some sort. But the next instant, she found herself back in bed, and the little creature was nowhere to be seen. UFOs also continued to appear. On Father's Day 1980, the entire family witnessed one of these events out in the yard. 2 of the children saw it first and called to the others to come look. They arrived in time to see a cloudy-looking object hovering silently about 10 feet from the ground with what seemed to be bubbles inside before it disappeared. Less than a year later, Beth once again had a bedroom visitation by unknown beings. As she prepared to go to bed, she began to feel as if someone was watching her. Turning around, she saw a tall, slender man standing by her bed, and she became very frightened. Beth tried to scream, but no sound came out. But she began to pray silently for help. And then she found that she was moving, going forward towards the man's outstretched hand. Unable to stop, she floated after him towards the window and knew she was about to be taken through it. This panicked her even more, and she feared she would be ground up like hamburger by the process. The actual moment of passing through the window, however, left no impression on her when it happened. And apparently the praying once again didn't work, did it? Isn't that fascinating? The prayer didn't work again. And no impression on her when it happened, and she was next aware of being in a dark place, lying down, surrounded by a feeling of great speed. Blackness overtook her, and the next apparent moment she was back in bed in the guest room. Still unable to move, she could scream, however, which she did, bringing her husband running, but the strange man, of course, had disappeared. So her husband came and rescued her, but not the prayer. Jesus didn't show up, huh? Beth wasn't the only one in her family to witness the alien beings. In 1986, she and her son saw a small white entity. Beth was in bed when she was surprised to hear the sound of water running somewhere. As she got up to check for the source, her son called for her to come outside with him. "Mommy, look there," he shouted. Beth looked, but without her glasses, all she could see was a distinct white object out in the yard. Her son, however, had better vision, and he described seeing a small being by the garage, holding a garden hose through which water was running. As the son watched, he told her the little being stopped and floated away. Later, in 1987, her best daughters said that 3 of the Greys had come during the night and taken her out to an area near the house, into a UFO. She said they talked together in a friendly manner and that one of the aliens even laughed. She also reported that the presence of a strange man who told her he was going to fix her heart as he inserted a large needle into her chest. Beth believed this occurred at a time when her daughter was awaiting heart surgery. So apparently he didn't fix her heart. So he apparently didn't fix her heart, and Jesus didn't save her mama. Isn't that interesting? Now, a lot of people will be offended by what I just said there, but if you really think about what I just said, it's important. Whether you believe in it or not, in Jesus or vice versa, or either. It was also at this time that Beth recalled having a brief, vivid dream that greatly disturbed her. In this dream, she was on a table located on location unknown, with 3 men standing around her. The terrifying part of the scenario was that a single sentence she heard spoken by one of the men: "She is expendable, and we can always use a Terminator." And this experience was so unlike the previous encounters she had remembered that Beth insisted it was just a dream, but the idea and the threat of a Terminator, whatever it might be, haunted her. So did the identity of the man. Another situation arose during this time that caused her a great deal of concern, even though it seemed to have nothing to do with UFOs or aliens. Several different mornings, when she woke and went into the kitchen for coffee, she found the water jug normally kept in the refrigerator and 4 glasses containing water sitting outside on the counter. The first time this occurred, Beth was annoyed by the inconsiderate act, and she questioned her son and daughter about it. Both of them denied leaving out the water jug and even being in the kitchen after bedtime. The next time she found the dirty glasses and the jug, and Beth became angry and found it hard to believe her children protestations of innocence in the matter. What were they doing, she wondered, getting up in the middle of the night and inviting people, visiting them in secret? Why was it done in secret? Why were they denying doing it? The questions bothered her greatly. Her children were adamant that they had nothing to do with the intermediate discoveries. With the indeterminate discoveries of the jug and glasses left on the counter by undiscovered persons during the night. Finally, Beth came to believe them, but that made her even more afraid, for it pointed to a scenario of 4 strangers with free access to her home and her family. Yet no one in the family saw any strangers there, and none of the household goods had been stolen. But the scenario of the strangers breaking in merely for a sip of water just didn't make any sense, and Beth couldn't believe the visitors were aliens. But if all they seemed to do was pour themselves a drink and leave a mess on the kitchen counter and then disappear. Beth worried about this mysterious situation for a long time, even after the visitors' visit stopped. She never caught anyone in the act of entertaining guests or getting out water jugs, which would have explained the whole affair. Much later, however, Beth did have a flashback memory concerning the situation. In a very upsetting scenario, she saw herself opening the door and letting a group of people into the house. She even saw herself pouring the water. Beth didn't recognize any of the people, and the flashback memory did not show her why she let them in or what they did there after the pouring of their drinks. She didn't know if the flashback reflected a real event or if it came from her imagination. It certainly feels real, but it seems so unlikely that Beth just couldn't accept it. In September 1987, however, an indisputable real event occurred. Another UFO appeared and was witnessed by 3 members of the family. Okay. Mommy, there's a UFO up there. Beth heard her daughter shout on night around 11 okay. Heard her daughter shout on night, maybe it's at night, around 11 p.m. That's how I would say it. Right. She got up and looked to see a huge, beautiful UFO about half a mile from the house. The son also saw it briefly. The sighting seemed no different than previous ones, but it was followed the next day by the onset of activity that would continue for years, overflights of unidentified helicopters. On the first day, a AWAC was also flew over. Like I said, AWAC? I'm not sure what that is. In addition to the black copters, and the craft operated at such a low altitude that sometimes the windows and the entire house were shaken by their force. They returned a week later, and this time Beth even witnessed a craft that looked like a helicopter but flew noiselessly. She continued to have frightening nocturnal experiences, usually involving fragmented scenarios and time loss. Once after midnight, for example, Beth went through an event of which she only consciously retained 3 snapshot-type memories. The first part began when she was still quite conscious. As she looked out the window at some red and white lights she just noticed in the yard. The second scene is of her out in the yard, watching a craft flying away and crying, "Don't leave me." This was followed instantly by her being conscious again and aware that she was back in her bed. During these years of fairly active alien involvement in her life, Beth had a number of dreams relating to UFOs, the Greys, and the other source of entities. Some people may think that this is foolish to look for information in dreams, but a close familiarity with the multi-phenomenal contact of the abduction situation shows that it is not so. In abduction research, it is generally acknowledged that many times the memories of an alien encounter suppressed at the time of the event will surface in any number of ways. It may happen as a sudden flashback during a regular consciousness, or it may emerge during a dream state. It also may be that what the person recalled as a dream was not a memory of some past event, but instead reflected an event of that particular night, so lightly suppressed that it remained in the consciousness as an altered state awareness. At any rate, it is wise to pay attention to the dreams of a person with current alien activity. Current details, often identical, turn up from case to case, differ from typical archetypical entities and situations found in normal dreams. This was certainly true for Beth's dreams. In one, for example, she was with an unfamiliar alien being in an environment where the sky was pink, and she recalled seeing an animal similar to a cow. All of these details have been reported by other abductees, sometimes in dreams and sometimes in actual experiences. So has the scenario she recalled from another dream, being given a liquid to drink by the Greys. In a different dream, Beth was made to immerse in a heavy liquid and was surprised to find that she could breathe in it. This scenario is so familiar now that it is often included in the list of most frequently reported abduction events. Beth was concerned and curious about these dreams, and as she was about to experience, she's about the experiences she recalled consciously. So when the opportunity arose for her to work with a well-known UFO investigator and to undergo her regressive hypnosis, Beth decided to do it. In early 1988, she underwent 4 separate sessions of hypnosis, all focusing on a single event. The encounter in 1978, when she remembered being in a circular room with her husband, 1 child, and 3 strangers. The following account, and a composite of information from those sessions, comprising all the bits and pieces that emerged during the regressions. Beth recalled that when the light shone in through the window that night, she saw several aliens were in the room. She was terrified, but one of them calmed her down and seemed to be in charge as he led her outside to a craft. The next part of her memory is patchy, for she was in a small room in which the atmosphere seemed foggy, and she couldn't see much more than several strange instruments on a table. One of them looked somewhat like a hair dryer. Next, 2 of the aliens took her down a curved hall through a door into a different area. It looked to Beth like a surgery room, and she became afraid they were going to kill her there. She cried out in fear when they placed her on a floating table. Overhead, she saw a screen upon which her insides were displayed. A 3rd alien in the room engaged in some communication with the 2 escorts. Beth sensed that he seemed more compassionate than the others. This 3rd entity, holding a black box, then moved to a position behind Beth. She could not see what he did, but she felt as if her head was being opened and her brain removed, all without any sensation of pain. After, she felt as if she were all put back together again. A cold liquid was poured over her head. Then the procedure was finished. The aliens stood in front of her, and Beth realized that mentally she was different. Her thoughts and reactions to everything were changed. It seemed as she was filled with new ideas about God and the unity of all life within the Supreme Source. Within that Supreme Source. This very spiritual moment was followed by a quite physical exam, as the aliens took samples from her skin and hair. A man with a widow's peak hairline similar to the one she'd seen before entered and made a full examination of her body, including a gynecological procedure. This was the first upsetting part of the experience for Beth, and she was especially frightened with when he produced 2 long, thin needles and explained that he had to make some corrections involving her kidney and ovary. He inserted the needles in the areas of those organs, and Beth felt a warm vibration. The man said this alignment was necessary to put her glands in better condition for what they wanted her to do in service to humanity. He talked at length about changing the human vibration. Next, a young woman similar in whatever that means, human vibration. Next, a young woman similar in looks to the man came into the room and proceeded to clean Beth's body with a sponge and a liquid. She escorted Beth back to the first room, where a man continued to explain about certain things. For one, he told her that she and other human beings were chosen to carry out jobs in the future. He also described a coming disaster of the world, of course, and explained to her about working as a spiritual being for the good of humanity. The alien said that his group was here to study, collect genetic material, and avert a destructive process which humans had started. Okay. All the same messages. She then recalled nothing more than being back in the round room with her husband. Beth was very shaken by the recovered memories, and she said she had no idea why she was chosen, as they had told her. After the regressions, Beth's subconscious became more accessible because she started having conscious flashbacks of previous unremembered events. In the summer of 1988, while chatting with a friend, Beth suddenly experiences one of these flashbacks. It began with her in a small flying saucer entering a well-lit underground city. The craft flew on through a tunnel passage into an enormous cavern that contained several buildings. She also saw some UFOs parked in various locations and aliens working side by side with human military personnel. The next scenario is of Beth flying somehow through a body of water in a tunnel and then emerging from a lake. She also remembered trying to run away, but a big man grabbed her and said, we brought you here because we want you to see this. As a huge craft rose out of the water. Beth then got back into the little craft and flew up to the huge one. The entire memory was strange and disturbing, and Beth had no idea when such an event might have occurred. Shortly after the regressions in August 1988, Beth received a mysterious phone call from a voice that sounded as if it were coming from a vacuum. An unknown man said, "Elizabeth." "Yes," Beth replied. "Who are you?" "We know about your experience," the voice said, "and we know about all the problems and doubts you have, but we can't give you proof." "Who are you?" Beth persisted. "Why are you telling me this?" "Don't be afraid," the strange voice continued. "We can give you proof. We want to talk to you. So next Thursday, go to the botanical garden and be there at 10. We know you. Don't worry about looking for us. Don't tell anybody and go there alone." Everything about that call was suspicious. The use of disguised voice, the disturbing references to Beth's experiences, and the insistence that she come by herself to the meeting, and she felt the call implied a threat. She told the investigator with whom she was working, but she didn't want to go to the garden. Later, however, Beth changed her mind, so she picked up the investigator and went on to the appointment place. Although neither of them saw any suspicious human beings and any alien presence, Beth said a communication about love, faith, friendship, and service was put into her mind there in the garden. On the drive back home, Beth felt dizzy and ill. Her body didn't seem to work right, and her sense of time was very disoriented. According to the clock, she even gained time on the return trip, and for a while thereafter, day and night seemed to go very quickly. Even more disconcerting was the clear sensation of her hand passing through solid objects as she reached for them. But the bizarre perceptions eventually passed, and there were no further phone calls. In 1990, 2 years after the flashback of the underground facility with humans and aliens working together, more of Beth's memories of this event surfaced in a dream. She saw herself stepping out of an aircraft with 2 military men, and they were in a desert-like area reminiscent of the American Southwest, with buildings that matched the desert environment. A dark grassy pool of water was near a large metal building that looked like a warehouse inside. An old-fashioned wooden door opened to reveal a very high-tech metal door, through which Beth was taken into a large room. There she saw 4 big tables and a number of people. Some of them looked to be military, and some were clad like scientists, and others appeared to be regular people. A uniformed redhead man of the 2 who had brought her to the facility seemed to be in charge of her. 2 more men entered the room wearing outfits Beth described as similar to astronaut gear. They talked to Beth and the other people, although she didn't remember what was said. And then someone shouted, and a group started running towards the back of the large room. The redhead-haired man grabbed her, and then the flashback ended. But the next morning, Beth found bruises in the exact spot where the man had grabbed her arm. The memory felt real, but she had no idea when such a fantastic event might have occurred. Of course, mysterious things had been happening all along and continued to occur, and continue to occur sightings of UFOs and strange lights, episodes of unexplained time gaps, occasional appearances of patterned bruises and punctures on her body, and for most of these events, Beth had no explanation or memory either. It was clear that her conscious recollections about these things were merely the tip of the iceberg, and whatever lay behind the surface had been deeply suppressed. Beth might have been able to tell herself that all these events weren't real and that she had imagined them, until an event occurred which proved that the weirdness wasn't only in her mind. In 1992, during a visit to Miami, she and a friend were driving from his house to her daughter's home one night. A trip of 30 to 45 minutes on the turnpike. They started out at 9:50 p.m. and things proceeded normally at first, but then they both noticed that the other cars in both directions had disappeared from view. Beth saw a large, dark, shadowy form looming up ahead of them, which she thought might be a bridge. She reasoned that the bridge's great shadow had somehow blocked their view of the other traffic. At the very next instant, it seemed she and her friend felt the car set back down on the turnpike. The driver lost control of the wheel and fighting to steer the car out of danger, and Beth found herself inexplicably unlocked the seat belt and staring out the window and shouting, "Where are they? Where are they?" "How do you feel?" her friend asked. Confused, she told him, "My hair was standing up like static electricity, and there's a bad pressure on my neck and my forehead." Her friend said he was having the same symptoms too, and that he didn't know what had just happened. Beth noticed the shadowy shape was gone and traffic was thick all around them. "The bridge must have blocked our view," she told her friend, explaining about the shadowy form. But her friend, who drove that turnpike regularly, told her there was no bridge at that location. They continued on the drive, bewildered, and when they reached her daughter's home, all the lights were out and the place was silent. Beth looked at her watch and was shocked to see it read 11:55. She knew they should have arrived no later than 10:45, which meant that over an hour was missing. And this time she hadn't been alone. The mystery was just as great as ever, though, for neither of them remember anything other than being in the car. The pattern was always the same: evidence of an odd event, a fragment of a puzzling scenario, a blank in the place where the details should have been, everything missing. Every missing hour was a grievous loss to Beth, a dark emptiness in her life. She had seen aliens, she had seen humans, some of them military, but she had no clue as to what any of them were really doing. The agenda behind these events had remained unknown, and Beth had continued to struggle with her questions and her fears because the events continued to occur. In January 1993, for instance, when she was staying in a Miami apartment with her son and daughter, Beth experienced another missing time episode, and this time she discovered artifactual evidence afterward. The event was preceded by a number of odd but minor occurrences involving each member of the family. On Wednesday, June 27th, they had all gone to bed at midnight. Beth woke at 4:39 a.m. and went to the bathroom. On her way back to bed, she suddenly felt a compulsion and an instruction to go into the kitchen and pull up the window. She became afraid and fought against the urge, but still she walked to the window and opened it without looking out before returning to her bed. As she lay down, Beth gazed at the window and thought, "I don't want to see." She began to turn over the face to face the other direction, and at that moment she heard something that sounded like a train, followed by a sound of an electronic door closing. Rolling on over, she glanced at the window again and saw that it was daylight outside. The bedside clock read 6:45. 2 hours had disappeared in the time it took her unconsciously to turn over in the bed. The realization startled her. and Beth got up in great agitation. She went to the kitchen to make coffee and tried to figure out what had happened, but without success. When she went to take a shower, and that was when she noticed that both her knees were coated with a chalky white substance, as if she'd been kneeling in the unknown powder. But she couldn't imagine where she might have been, for the substance was unlike anything in her house. In spite of her agitation, the morning activities had gone on, so Beth woke up her children to get ready for work. Before he left, her son remarked that something might have happened to him during the night because he discovered a puncture on his forearm that he couldn't explain. And when they returned in the evening, Beth told them about the events of the previous night and the strange sounds and the missing time and the white substance and the apparent fact that she must have been out of the house temporarily, but her son, who'd slept at the foot of Beth's bed in a sleeping bag, said he didn't think that was possible. She was sitting in the bed last night, he told his sister. She acted afraid, talking to someone. I saw a figure in the doorway, he added, but at the time he said he couldn't get up and apparently fell back to sleep. Everything about the event remained a mystery. In this final account from Beth's ongoing experiences, an event occurred which had identical details to a bizarre report I had learned about from a close relative. Beth's parallel story confirmed that it wasn't the imaginations of a single mind. Either the aliens were actually doing these things, activities that were not familiar from other abduction accounts, or they were creating the same virtual reality scenario for at least two unrelated abductees. Beth was in Miami when the experience occurred, staying with a friend and sleeping on his couch. One night he awoke and watched in amazement as a rectangle of light, like a very thin page of paper, came in through the window. She could see an area in the center of the white, pink, and purple lights were moving about. The rectangle of light stopped in midair, and out of the center emerged a full-grown man, very tall and wearing a tight-fitting suit and small helmet. The man stood up and leaned over her, and bringing his face very close to hers. He was above her, but as she stared into his eyes, she said she felt as if she was falling. That's where the memory ended, and Beth was aware of nothing more until she woke up in the morning in a daze, groggy condition that persisted throughout the day. And during repeated episodes of such activity, she has no clear understanding of these events. Now that at first, she has no clear. And during repeated episodes of such activity, she has no clear understanding of these events now than at first. Okay, that's what it is. She does, however, have feeling about it all, and a certain beliefs which she clings. Although she is never certain of who has abducted her or what they have done, Beth feels that at least one of her experiences in the 1978 event involved a benevolent group of aliens. They brought me an enormous sense of, oh my God, a sense of affinity with God. So this is one of them. They brought me an enormous sense of affinity with God. And she said, with the universe and with love. She also recognized that our forces seem to be a part of the overall phenomena. There's a battle of good and evil, she said, explaining her feelings about the situation. Sometimes they interact with in our lives, bringing pain and confusion, but I hold on to faith that my good ETs will help us. She feels very strongly that the future catastrophic events the aliens described will indeed come about, and that she and other abductees will play a vital role at the time. But that doesn't keep her from feeling fear and depression. More certainly, she fears the possibility military or human intrusions, unable to forget the threat that she is expendable. To face these fears, she relies on her religious belief for strength. My faith has nurtured me, Beth said. I am a part of God. Faith, love, and truth will pull us through the enormity of things that are going to happen. This is the spiritual part. The physical part, unfortunately, continues to include anxiety, sleep disorder, sudden and total energy losses, and a number of health problems, and marks on her body that indicate the aliens are interested in more than just her spirit. And then you got some illustrations here. Illustrations, large craft into which Angie was abducted in 1992. Whee! Of course, they're just drawings. Machine and aliens taking a soil sample of Angie's yard. Whee! Power suggestion, anyone? Aliens showed Angie this clone nursery. Oh, that's nice. Brave New World, anyone? Soul machine at which Pat sat and made music by touching different colored lights. Then we got a drawing here. Jane saw 7 robed entities, one holding a brilliantly lit globe at a curved table. Yep, there's that thing. I've seen people film that out in the field and people researching. Jane's vision of aliens activating certain Texas. Jane's vision of aliens activating certain Texas locations. Activating, huh? You know, the argument about them coming from the ground might just be the answer too. Amy awoke at this point while being floated out of her house in 1981. Whee! I don't know why we need to have these drawings. Polly's snapshot memory of wrinkled-browed aliens. Whee! Amy with masked aliens in underground facility. slit-eyed human figure Amy met with masked alien. So it's got to be slit-eyed one, and that's the masked one, huh? Snake eyes. Ear and neck implants removed from Amy's body. That's just where it's at, and then there's brain and blah, blah. But I don't know, there's no like actual, okay, no photographs. Just some of these artist renderings, huh? Now I get to read about Jane. Subject number 7. Most abductees have always been aware of strange events in their lives. Odd lights, unaccountable time gaps, unknown figures in the night, and extending back into childhood. They may not have been aware of UFOs or aliens, at least by those terms, but they knew mysterious things had occurred. In Jane's case, however, her consciously recalled experiences with the unknown didn't begin until 1992. Since that time, she has witnessed almost every typical detail of an abduction situation, a life worth of experiences in less than 2 years. And with all the evidence so recent, her situation offers an excellent opportunity for research. She was eager to share information after our initial contact, and she genuinely wanted to understand this mysterious new puzzle in her life. Born in 1943, Jane has Irish, English, German, French, Creek, Cherokee, and Apache ancestry. How the hell can you have all that? Especially the Creek and Cherokee and Apache part of it. Anyways, she is a 6th generation Texan. Well, maybe that's the way it is. Okay, there it is. That's the answer. She is 6th generation Texan residing in the Central Hill Country. Jane was a nurse for many years until arthritis prevented her from working, and she has also been a journalist, photographer, vocational archaeologist. She is divorced with no children, lives with several dogs, good boy, including her favorite buddy, Ecstasy, in a rural setting near a large city. Compact, independent, and perky. Jane enjoys sky watching, music, including voice recitals. In addition to her professional talents, Jane has also demonstrated psychic abilities. I was tested for over 2 years on a regular basis, she reported, by 2 research foundations in San Antonio for psychic abilities. Among them were telepathy, precognition, psychokinesis, remote viewing, and clairvoyance, with the test showing positive results. Since the UFO activity has started, her psychic senses seem to have increased. Lately, my psychic abilities have intensified to the point that it's hard for me to be around groups any length of time, she said, without feeling mentally assaulted and battered. These abilities may be part of the reason why Jane's flashes of memories have come so often while she has been conscious, rather than only through dreams. Her UFO involvement began in the summer of 1992 with a multiple witness sighting and a number of strange events soon followed. Something deep and profound has been occurring in me since July of '92, she said in our first correspondence. If you ask me if I've been abducted, I have to be honestly say I have no absolute memory per se. I can only point to my scars and say I think something has happened, but cannot remember, only flashes of things, and I am not sure I can trust the flashes. Like Polly and several others, Jane was not eager to claim abductee status, nor that her experiences would be confirmed as absolutely real by an outside observer. In fact, she made no claims at all about what these events and alien agenda might be, but did hope to find answers. And when she realized the possible implications of several events, Jane approached the phenomena from an investigative point of view. This involved keeping scrupulous journal entries, not only of sightings, flashbacks, dreams, and odd events, but also for physical and emotional responses to these things. She filed sightings reports with local MUFON group and hosted several parties of skywatchers on the property. Further, Jane attempted on many occasions to photograph the UFOs as well as helicopters and odd planes, sometimes invisible ones, however, which overflew her house. From these research records and my investigation, the following account emerged showing the presence of an abduction history. In Jane's case, several things are noteworthy. For one, the frequency of her UFO sightings is well above that of the typical abductee, and several of them were multiple witnessed and photographed. Also, while Jane has not recalled a conscious, full-blown encounter, most of her memories have come from conscious flashbacks rather than dreams. Her dreams, by the way, are vivid and frequently recalled, but they seem only occasionally to contain alien-related information, and this is usually in a screen form. Finally, Jane's experiences have involved a number of telepathic communications and sudden knowings of messages or information. She remarks the date of her involvement from the August sighting, but a couple of months before this, Jane sensed something different in her environment. She said she felt as if she were being watched, and thinking in normal terms that the watchers were human, she became very cautious and alert. For a while, she resorted to carrying a gun, so certain was she of an unseen presence. And then she saw the UFO on August 12, 1992, with a witness, and her reality began to shatter. Since it was during the Perseid meteor shower, is that how you pronounce it? The Perseid, Perseid, it is Perseid meteor shower, and my mother had never seen one. Jane said, we decided to get up at 4 a.m. at the height of the shower and go get a good look. We didn't really see many meteors, but we stayed out even though that was disappointing. At about 5:30, I saw a white bright light doing odd maneuvers in the sky overhead. I called my mom's attention to it, and then we watched the spectacular UFO show by first one, then two lights for about 15 minutes until daylight. Mom and I were amazed by what we'd seen and talked about it all day. The lights were round and white, one brighter than the other, and there was no sound, and the first light converted constantly, making rapid figure 8 circular and L-shaped patterns. When the second large light showed up, the two objects raced toward each other, and the first one blinked to stop, and the second one circled around it. Then they made a series of fast movements like two flies flying in circles around each other. They separated for a while, each engaged in its own aerial maneuvers until the second object departed to the west. The first object remained in sight, flying in various patterns until the rising of the sun obscured its light. Jane was excited by the event and thought about it frequently for a few days. But then, as she told me, after a while, life took over and it was pushed to the back burner until October 1st. Her sister came to visit that evening, and when Jane mentioned that bats had been coming to catch bugs around the outdoor light, they went out to watch them. It was barely dark and the bats were active, Jane said, and when we saw a very bright white light coming fast and low towards us from the west, it went directly over without a sound and turned slightly southwest and went a short way and blinked out. We never saw a shape of any sort attached to the light. We saw 3 more lights doing impossible maneuvers that night. The second sighting of anomalous aerial activity seriously puzzled Jane, and through a magazine article, she obtained the phone number of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network. She was put in touch with a local MUFON group and received a form to report her sightings. Shortly afterwards, Jane joined the organization and began to read about the subject. And that probably just screwed everything up right there. Through the books and articles, she learned not only about UFO sightings, but also about abduction phenomena. It was the reading, she said, that helped me realize that maybe something was happening to me. I had many of the same odd things happen to me that I was reading about. It wasn't until November 3rd that I made a list of the odd things that had happened since July. The list frightened me because it had too many classic signs, and I kept having a gut feeling that something had happened. One particular item on the list was especially suspicious, as it involved a time gap. Planning to drive into town with her friend Brenda to see some friends perform in a band, Jane left her house just before 7 p.m. on October 30th to make the 15-minute drive. I was just a short way down the road from my house, and Jane described when an owl came flying directly at my windshield. I thought it was going to crash into the glass, but at the last minute it just curved smoothly over the top of the car without contact. I had never had that happen, and was glad it didn't hit me. I continued on my way and got to Brenda's. She met me at the door, worried, and asked if anything was wrong. I said no. Why? She said that I was late, and she had called the house and left a message on my phone machine. She was worried because I was usually early, and it was late enough that she thought maybe I had a wreck or something. I was really surprised to find out that it was 7:50 p.m. I couldn't account for the time loss because I should have been there at 7:10 or 7:15 at the latest. The whole thing made no sense, for Jane went back through the trip mentally several times and could not find any reason for the 30 to 40 minute delay. Not even a moment out of sequence, but something didn't feel right, she said. I think it worked on my subconscious because it was 3 days later that I made the list of all the curious things that had been happening since July. 10 days later, Jane began keeping a daily journal of events. She woke up that morning with a bloody nose, sore throat, large bruises on her arm, for which she couldn't account. She had not been aware of anything unusual other than a vague sense of some activity. Many of the oddities she noted were too ambiguous to give her proof of any abduction or alien involvement in her life, but the UFO sightings were real. That much felt certain, and they continued to recur. The very next one, in fact, was even preceded by an announcement of sorts, and 3 p.m. on December 1st, Jane suddenly received a communication, a very clear message that the UFOs would show up that night for her to photograph. She was given excellent instructions to clear her lenses and put new batteries in her camera. I'll get my camera and they'll show a sign to me. I noted in my journal, I feel it strongly. At 5:30, she had prepared with a palette, binoculars, the camera, some more clothes, and at 6:40, the UFO appeared. Jane quickly snapped 5 photos. One of them turned out well, showing a large single light of which the back portion appears wider than the front. It wasn't as good as she hoped, but good enough to make her determined to shoot more photos, since the UFOs seemed to be showing up rather frequently. And after the fulfillment of the telepathic communications promise, Jane couldn't help but feel that the mysterious phenomena of lights in the sky wasn't a random occurrence. This seemed to have a connection to her. The next day, December 2nd, when she returned home from voice lessons, Jane entered the house and discovered an unrecognizable odor permeating the air. She described it as acrid, strong, heavy, sharp, pungent, and tangy. Unrelated to food or smoke odors, and unlike anything she had ever smelt. Its source was never located. That night, Jane witnessed another anomalous light. This one was not in the sky, but rather low to the ground and very close to her house. It was shortly after midnight, and she had turned off the light for the night. I was lying quietly on my back thinking, Jane said, and my blinds were open. Shortly just beyond the trees, I saw a flash of blue light. I saw it at the top of my cedar tree, and then it dropped down to the level of the window across the pane. Dogs around began barking. Mine didn't. They lay asleep, and I thought, they're here. My whole body tingled, and my midsection was welled up with something, and I watched it and didn't see anything else for a few minutes. Then I saw a light bulb flash to the right and then left for the window. Her drawing shows an intermediate light spiraling downward, moving from one side to the other in the window. Inexplicably, or perhaps not, Jane didn't get up to check. Inexplicably, or perhaps not, Jane did not get up to check on the situation. Instead, she instantly fell asleep and was awake a minute the next, asleep. She was awake one minute and the next asleep. Her journal notes, I guess I was scared. 2.5 hours later, at 3:40 a.m. on December 3rd, Jane woke up. She felt instantly awake and alert, as if she hadn't been asleep at all, and stayed up the rest of the night. Around 6 a.m., Jane happened to look at her back and was surprised to see 2 fresh scratches on her left shoulders, and a scratch and a welt on the left one. She also noticed as the day went on that she was having difficulty discerning right and left directions, something that had never happened to her before. This last 2 weeks, as did an almost total loss of short-term memory. So this lasted 2 weeks, as did an almost total loss of short-term memory. I really like that. At 7:15 a.m., the house was shaken and vibrated by a loud noise of a helicopter. It flew towards the south, lingered momentarily by the side of the house, and then continued on. Jane was surprised by the helicopter because even though there had been unusual numbers of them flying over her house since the first UFO sighting, she hadn't seen one in several days, and the last one's arrival had coincided with a UFO. She realized just as this one showed up, only hours after the blue light's appearance. She wondered if she were imagining connections that didn't exist, if her increasingly agitated, disoriented, and frightened state of mind was clouding her logic. But the nervous feelings continued even though she tried to explain them away. The strobe light scared me because there was no sound, she noted in the journal, and the light was too close not to hear if it was a plane or a copter. It was a silent light. Silent light, silent light. silent light preceded by an unknown acrid odor, followed immediately by a sudden loss of consciousness, and in conjunction with unexplained scratches, body marks, and disorientation. All that were missing were the memories. On the evening of December 4th, Jane found another unexplained injury, a quarter-sized bruise on her right hand. Examining the rest of her body, she also noticed a new addition to a pattern of marks which had been showing up on her forearm. They included 2 circles and 2 lines of V-shape in a V-shape. And now there was also a cut line connected to the larger circle, as well as a small red dot near the other circle. The closing line of her journal entry for that night included a very intriguing final line. Felt better after I talked to SL and laughed tonight. I needed it. I feel good. Up. I am not so afraid to see them now. I feel a lot has been connected in my mind. 2 nights later, Jane recorded a curious dream in which occurred between 11 p.m. when she went to bed and at 1:30 a.m. when she awoke. On the surface, nothing about it seemed related to any of these previous events, but an examination of several details shows a possible screen memory or screen new event. A group of women arrived at my house for a birthday party, she noted in the journal. They seemed familiar, but didn't know any of them from real life. They were purposeful and quite determined. We did some unrememberable things in a small house. I stayed mostly in the bedroom. I was disagreeable after a while, and they were put out with me. One of them knew better, and she was the leader, and they were about as tall as I. I don't remember spoken words. At one point, I was really disagreeable and tussled with them. They left me in the bedroom and conferred together in the kitchen. It's weird. Finally, they came out and said they had to go. They began to leave as a group, and I felt bad about what I had done and asked them to reconsider. They said no and looked put out. They began to leave, and I watched them go, sadly and relieved, too. The leader did all the communicating. Jane enclosed a number of words in quotation marks, as if to suggest that they weren't what they seemed to be, including birthday, real life, and bedroom. Do they suggest that the purpose of the group's visit was not her birthday, that they might be familiar from experiences that weren't part of Jane's normal life, and that the room was not a bedroom? The group's demeanor is not festive, but rather purposeful and quiet. No one speaks but the leader, a curious term for a social visitor. She didn't remember her activities with the group in the bedroom, nor why she was disagreeable. And next page. Resistant. Whatever occurred was clearly not a party game, and finally her feelings about them when they prepared to depart are strongly ambiguous. If these visitors and events and emotions are put into abduction terms, the parallel is obvious. A group of vaguely familiar visitors arrive, interact with a person in a small enclosure. The interactions are disagreeable to the person, who feels resistant. Only one of the group, the leader, communicates with the person, and when the visitors leave, the person has confused emotions and can't recall all the details of the interaction. Given these parallels, it may well be that Jane's dream images screened an actual alien abduction. 5 days later, however, on December 9, she had a conscious perception of unknown visitors. She awoke from a dream around 5:30 a.m. and realized she was hearing voices and faint music downstairs. In the living room, she listened in surprise, but abruptly the noise ceased. Then I could hear someone walking away from the bed towards the stairs and down them, she wrote. The sound was a loud blue jean rub between the thighs of a man. I listened for several moments when suddenly I caught the black outline of a man slipping past my window. He had a faint light outlining him. He was like electrostatic electricity. I would assume. I just added that part. He was tallish and in a hurry. He was just a quick flicker and then gone. I was paralyzed with fear. I tried to reach for my gun, but couldn't move. I tried so hard, but I was so scared I couldn't move. And when I looked at the window, I could move then, and everything was okay. This intrusion marked the end of a series of events that had begun with the silent blue light near Jane's house. Other possible UFO sightings continued to occur, not always with concomitant odd activities. She watched two nocturnal lights fly in arched path on January 9th, 1993, for instance, and three lights going in opposite directions on April 10. The lights would fade in and travel slowly, and then fade out and disappear. She wrote in her journal, I saw two bright golden streaking meteors, plus a huge bright flash through the trees southwest of my house. Seemed to be in the woods, of course. A lot of electrostatic electricity is generated in the leaves rustling against each other in the woods. They create kind of a vortex, if you will. And then on May 16, Jane had a spectacular UFO sighting that was witnessed not only by her mother, who was visiting, but also by several people all around the area of a large lake. That evening, Jane received a phone call from one of the local MUFON members who told her that she had gotten a report of a triangular UFO near Jane's location. She asked if Jane would go outside and have a look. Immediately, Jane ran out and spotted a light in the sky towards the lake, alternating and rotating with red, green, amber, and white lights. Her mother stepped out and also saw the object, which hovered for about 10 minutes before drifting off to the north. Jane was distracted by her mother for a few minutes, and when she looked back to the west, the light was gone. Disappointed, she stood there for a while, wishing it would come back. so she could make a better observation. Within minutes, unbelievably, the triangular craft reappeared, floating low overhead with a soft humming sound and a whoosh of air as it passed. The lights showed different colors this time, with 4 white lights down its sides, a big white light on the front, and a blinking red light. As it turned out, there were quite a few witnesses. A local weekly newspaper reported the sighting in its May 20 edition with the front page story. The UFO was described as a rainbow-colored and was seen between 9 and 10 p.m. A couple of hours later, the UFO had returned, and perhaps a different craft, because the police started getting reports around midnight of an object with orange, blue, and white lights which appeared to descend and land in a field. Whatever Jane had been seeing, others had seen things too, and she had no doubt of the UFO's reality. Nor could she ignore the weird external events and oddities that had been occurring since her first sighting in the summer of 1992. The list of these events reads like a litany of peripheral abduction activity. To begin with, not only did she see the anomalous flying lights, Jane also occasionally witnessed smaller, closer, more personal displays. Sometimes they were nearby in the woods, and sometimes even closer, as in the instance where 2 bright lights zipped between Jane and a friend with her on the sky watch. Bizarre electrical disturbances recurred, such as a radio suddenly turning itself on, and a television turning off, and a broken ceiling light turning on by itself. After 5 months of not working, Jane also had strange phone activities over these months. She received silent calls and numerous wrong number calls of a suspicious nature, and her answering machine behaved oddly. Additionally, she noted a number of time discrepancies. There were many unexplained noises in the house that had not been present before, loud pops and pings and creaks out of the ordinary, as well as humming and buzzing noises and strange clicking sounds on occasion. Outside of the house, loud helicopters started flying overhead at odd times of the day and night. When Jane reported this activity to the local UFO study group, the pattern changed for a while, and instead of helicopters, she witnessed a variety of planes now buzzing the property, including visible ones. Several times Jane awoke with her panties inside out, even though she is certain she didn't remove them. Also, she woke up once with her sleeping shirt inside out, and she has found blood on her pillow in addition to in her ear and nose, without any injury to account for these instances. But there have been injuries at other times, and mostly insignificant yet inexplicable in everyday terms. I had numerous unexplained odd bruises on my legs and my arms, she told me, and odd scratch whelps on my back. Right this moment, I have a bruise under my right eye that wasn't there yesterday, and small round bruises on my right thigh on the inside. Jane has also had a number of puncture marks in various places, including one point, several punctures inside her mouth and on her breast. Sometimes the marks appeared after a suspected encounter or strange dream, but not always, and there were usually only a few of them at a time. But on one occasion, after a vivid daytime dream, of seeing a gray, Jane found a number of body marks. Quote, saw Gray coming through the door with light behind him. End quote. She wrote in her journal, I wasn't afraid. I was waiting in the dark room. A light behind him obscured his front features. He didn't seem to have elbows. He lifted his left arm, and instead of it bending at the elbow, his arm asked to lift. No elbow was used. His hands were oversized with a covering. Seems like he had a willowy neck. His entire body was willowy, slender, slight, fragile-looking, grayish color, at best as I could see. Jane remembered no activity in the dream, only seeing the gray. But that same day, she discovered an extraordinary number of new marks over her body, from her calves to her shoulders. Jane and a friend counted and photographed 10 scratches, 13 bruises, 5 scrapes or scooped areas, 2 punctures, and an equilateral triangle of 3 dots. These appeared to have been very recent because 8 parallel claw-like welts on her shoulder faded away during the morning hours. For Jane, the UFO sightings and the physical marks were hard believable evidence, things that could be photographed and to show that something unusual was going on in her life. She had no photos, however, of the UFO's occupants, nor whoever or whatever had caused the body marks. What she did have were flashback memories and subconscious images of scenes in which she was with aliens. I don't think we should be calling these things aliens anymore, myself. I don't know if we should be calling them demons either, but whatever they are, they're not what, the official narrative has been saying. They were brief and incomplete, but tantalizingly evocative of many more unrecalled events. Evocative. Yeah. Once she suddenly saw herself lying on her back in a dark, dense atmosphere. Little hands are beneath me, she said, and I am moving softly through the air. She felt panicked, unable to respond, and then the memory clicked off, and another Jane recalled being with 4 aliens, fighting them as they carried her away, and being told of some impending event. Of course. Here we go again with the end of the world scenario. I wonder who got this idea of the end of the world scenario from when it comes to the Bible and all the Abrahamic faiths, right? One sudden memory showed her on a table with 4 grays around her, and one of them drinking. What? Tinkering with a square box. There's that square box again, to which hoses were attached and that ran up the ceiling. Another scenario involved aliens taking sample scrapings from her fingernails, which they telepathically explained as a test to check for pollution. 2 of the flashbacks concerned events in a round room. In the first one, she saw a white curved desk and a group of 7 beings with long hair and white robes seated behind it. The being in the center held a brightly lit globe in front of its face. The features of the other 6 were indistinct. The second event, a telepathic communication, came in a flash just after Jane had heard a weird humming noise on her porch. A scene came into her mind and of this inside of the inside of a craft which was sparsely furnished and illuminated by a lemony color light. 3 grays were present, one of whom was dressed in a long robe and another who was busy with control-like equipment on the wall. They like their robes, don't they? If there really are robes. Jane began to pick up telepathic communication, then hearing activate repeatedly. This was followed by the names of certain towns and areas in Texas, including the Panhandle, Big Bend, Gonzales, oh God, this is where my pronunciation goes. Leonode? No, that's not how you pronounce it. Let's pronounce it. There's Gonzales, and then how do you pronounce that town? Oh.
Lanos.
Okay. So, Panhandle, Big Bend, Gonzales, Lanos, St. Louis, Texas border. I made a mistake. Next page. And the St. Louis, Texas border. Well, the image just continued into her mind. The humming noise on the porch grew louder and followed her inside, where the implanted vision continued. One of the grays turned as if to look at Jane with an expression of parental amusement. Some of her dreams, as noted earlier, seemed to contain scenes and information that could be related to possible alien experiences, although they were usually in screen form. A few of the dreams about impending disasters and UFO landings, either to invade, monitor, or rescue humans, are common among abductees. Also common are dreams about sickly babies, acts of telekinesis and levitation, and strange people's faces very close to one's own. Jane has had only these dreams. Her most impressive UFO dream occurred in the wee hours of December 31st, 1992, and like so many abductees' dreams, this one proved to be the memory of a very real event. Jane's journal entry for that day began with her noticing a new mark on her body around 8:30 a.m. It was a strange grooved line over 1.5 inches long on top of her shin bone near the ankle. Then she described the dream. Vivid dream, she noted, with extraordinary auditory and clear images. During the night between 3 and 5:15 a.m., I dreamed I was walking outside when an extraordinary buzz hum began. The sound was loud, riveting, and pervaded through my body, threw me into the void and mental isolation. The sound seeped into my ordinary consciousness, a powerful sound. I looked up, and a huge gray mental saucer-like spaceship dropped straight down from the clouds on my right. Jane concluded. I sat down on a mesa, cross-legged as it sank to earth. As I looked at it, it changed to a sphere on 4 legs with strange marks on it. Shortly thereafter, it lifted straight up and then began to curve flight in front of me and circle to my left. I yelled, "Hello, hello." It swooped in to look at me. Its force field was tremendous, pushing pressure against my body, and was pushing me over, and I started to fall off the mesa. I asked it to move away. I can't keep my balance, and it came right up to me, to my face in front of my eyes. I began to fall. "Don't let me fall, don't let me fall," I pleaded. I sensed it caught me, and I lost consciousness and blacked out in my dream. I woke up at 5:15 a.m., panting hard. I could still hear the powerful sound. I'll never forget it, or the extraordinary sensation. Somehow I knew that it was. I knew that it was. Let me try this. I now know that it is what they really sound like. The dream seemed real, more real than I want to admit. I've never had a dream like that. Never. So clear and lucid. 7 months later, Jane decided to undergo regressive hypnosis to explore some of her strange memories and experiences. In the first session, she recalled a hitherto unrememberable event from childhood, and in the second session, she examined the UFO dream. Once she was in a trance state, Jane didn't describe the onset of the dream as she recalled it. Instead, she said she was on the bed and got up and walked away because... Next page. The powerful sound was hurting her ears. And then I got back and sit on the bed. And then I go back and sit on the bed. She said, I'm sitting cross-legged, and it drops in the room. The sound, it's a real thing. It's got hold of me, vibrating. Then asked about how the globe came into the room. Jane began crying, describing an entering a different scene. They were standing in front of me, she said, describing a group of human-looking men there in white clothes and very tall. They're watching my reactions. I'm standing barefoot on a cold, shiny floor. The sounds coming from my chest, a vibrating sound they're all making. They're all looking at me intently. They're tall and pale. When the hypnotist asked if she knew them as friends, Jane said, "They're not enemies. They're talking, telling me their energies going in it and vibrating sounds, that I am anointed, that whatever hard times may come, to have courage, that there would be times when I must need the shell to protect myself. But I have to learn to help build it, and that not even the most solid shell could help protect from some of the stuff, but it would do me well, at least attempt it, and that I will be frightened at times, but that fear is transitory and that it doesn't really hurt me." "Oh," she said suddenly, "but now I have to go in the other room." The doors opened up funny and disappeared. The room's so bright. Jane then described a brilliant room made of light that felt like a cocoon. She sat and was studied by one of the tall, pale men. This one had light hair, although the others had hair of various jewel-like colors. They mentally discussed the things she knows but cannot access consciously. He told her that the knowledge would come to Jane when she was ready, explaining that each energy has to build up and strengthen before it can withstand the whole thing. It has to be adjusted to move in different ways of coping and seeing, and that's not easy because there are clumps of resistance in all of us. None of this makes this. These are the angels, huh? When asked if this unexpected scenario was related to the dream of the UFO and the desert-like mesa incident with which the regression had begun, Jane said that it was, although she didn't make that connection clear. The tan world is a representation of reality, she said, and the different subtle shadings show how they could each fade into one another to make a whole, but yet are different. It is an actual place, yet it's a representation and symbolic. It is within our grasp. We can reach it. When I went there with help. James described the UFO as a device making observation of her. My ability to break out of the somnambulisms and to speak shows my strength. They were pleased. She said they, the tall beings, came in then to escort me out of it because I had shown that I could be strong enough. Were you aware of being in the tan dream in your physical body? The hypnotist asked, and Jane said she was. If someone had come to your house and looked in, the hypnosis persisted, would you not have been there in your physical form? Next page. I don't know, she replied. I was really there. It was real. My body was there. Not much more was elicited about the UFO dream and the regression, but in Jan's first hypnosis session, she remembered a series of events in rather detailed clarity. This abduction occurred when she was a young child staying with her grandmother, and her first awareness of something strange was seeing her nanny collapse on the ground outside while hanging up the laundry. Suddenly Jane felt that she was being watched and turned to see a group of 4 or 5 entities coming towards her. When she asked why they were there, she was told, "Don't worry, you'll be all right," and the beings escorted her towards the barn. "What does your friend look like?" the hypnosis asked. "Is he as tall as you?" "Taller." "Just a little," she replied. He's yellow." Jan's memory of the following events was patchy and confused. She thought the main entity led her into the barn, where she was placed in something like a bucket and swung around. After this, she recalled being physically examined, helped down naked from the table, and taken into a different room by a friend with dark, slanted eyes. "It's round and bright, bare," and Jan described, "I see colors, or just colors. The top is blue and the dark is royal blue. It's a pretty blue ceiling. The floor tickles my feet, tingling. We walked through the room and came to where all the animals are. And when I asked more about the animals, including a deer which she pets, she suddenly skipped to a scene of her crying beside Nanny, again still immobile, slumped over the clothes basket. Once Jane was calmed down from this, the hypnosis took her back through the entire scenario. This time Jane could see more about the examination and other details. When the bucket stopped moving, "Where are you?" she asked. "They held me out and set me on a table," Jane said. "It's a table. I've always been good before. Why are you crying so much?" "I don't know." He says, "I'll get over that. I won't feel so bad when I get older." What wouldn't feel so bad? "They're coming, their visits. It's so kind. They look at the right side and the left side. They lay me down, pick my legs up one at a time, and it tickles. They pull my toes and rub their hands up the sides and say, 'Turn,' so I turn." The exam continued, in which Jan was poked with an instrument that reminded her of a chapstick. Then she was taken into the colorful room, and from there to a third location. We got into the room with all the green. "It's so pretty," she described. "I see big plants and animals and colors too, of flowers and beautiful trees. I see rabbits and I see deer and bird. Oh, down there in the water." Next page. What water? There's a lot of water. It's like a huge swimming pool, something swimming in the water, but I want to see the deer. I walk over and see its eyes. It's white. What about the water? The hypnotist asks, because Jane had turned away from that image very nervously. I know what's in there. I don't want to look, Jane resisted. I don't want to look. You don't have to look, the hypnotist reassured her, but the images was already clear. I don't know what it is. Its head is really big. It's green, Jane said apprehensively, and then, in a panic, she shouted, oh, ah, oh, ow. It's got me. Oh, it has me by the neck. Ow, let me go. Oh, my ear hurts now. Jane was so upset by the recollection that after she had regained a calmer state of mind, the session was brought to a close. Afterwards, she described the water creature as having a long neck and some sort of knobs on its head. Something painful had happened to her ear, and then the creature disappeared back into the water. She remembered nothing more until the entity took her back to her grandmother, who then recovered consciousness. To date, whenever she had tried to read the transcripts of both regressions, she becomes so physically and emotionally upset that she can't do it. But these are fairly mundane events with the abduction scenario, and her overreaction may come from events which are still suppressed in her memory. Far more pleasant and at least acceptable have been the telepathic communications and knowings that have come to Jane without an alien's being present. The very first message came on November 25th, 1992, from which she recorded, I have suddenly understood that I must give myself to the awakening. I understood this as if it were being told to me. There is a strong sense of urgency. I must respect my mother and all other things, not hurt anything, to live and let live. The time will come when they will present themselves to me in my reality. Won't be long. As angels, they are in the midst of our mind. Give me myself to the takening, or to the awakening. Freudian slip there. Takening. Give myself to the awakening, to this, to do things in a good and calm manner, and everything will be okay. The second message on December 1st gave instructions and warned her to prepare to photograph the UFOs, which showed up as promised. April 22nd, 1993, she had another revelation. I understand I am to get all my notes together for Karla and her work, she wrote. What I have will be very helpful to her and is to be given freely as she asks. I am to make no special efforts to share. I am to make special efforts to share all with her. She is very important as a voice that will introduce increased realization and throughout the world. She is one of many who introduced the awareness to awakening. The next message on June 8th concerned something from which Jan felt she was being prepared or taught. I understand if I meditate on my prayer lists for healing at least once a day, then I will be shown results she recorded. That is the next step in my progression of activation. How far will it go will be determined by my level of discipline, passion, desire, and will. On June 27th, Jane woke from a dream about UFOs, but she couldn't recall any details. She did recall, however, coming to partial consciousness in the midst of the dream and trying to retain its details for later when she would be awake. But all she could remember was the briefest scenes. At one point, I was standing looking at myself, and another time, myself was behind me, and the word that morning, and she wrote that morning, but the notes were interrupted just then as a sudden realization came into her mind. It wasn't exactly the same as when the previous communications occurred, but it felt akin to that. All of a sudden, I can remember the dream lesson given to me last night, Jane said. It was illustrated and demonstrated to me the truth that I am truly a spiritual being. I'm animating a body. How do you know that? If they lied to you about everything else, how do you know this is true now? I am something separate from the body. The body is a tool, and I am entrapped in it. But I can separate from the body before death, and have done it many times without conscious knowledge. I am a pure spiritual being when without the body, and I will be again. Patience is required. I am a spiritual being only animating a shell. The body is nothing. The soul is all. On September 30th, a telepathic communication told Jane that she was now ready for the next level and the beginning of other things. She was told that some suppressed memories and information would be allowed to emerge, so I may retrieve that which will carry me forward. She saw herself as a single mirror of mankind, aware of choosing either to uplift or tear down by her actions and intentions. The following month, Jane experienced 2 more communications. I understand I am to attempt to rid myself of all violent and negative tendencies. Didn't know she had them. I didn't know. Where's the evidence she had it? To let go of controlling impulses. She was told during the first one, and the second one was simply, I understand truth is a lonely territory. Truth is lonely, each of his own. To disdain is incorrect. Jane had a recent flashback that seemed to fulfill the promise made in one of the communications about the release of suppressed memories. It concerned the UFO dream on December 31st, 1992. The saucer that transformed into a globe came up close to her face and forced her to fall. The new memories filled in the details much differently, however. After first watching a black saucer-shaped craft drop from the clouds like a cookie cutter, Jane sensed several intelligences in the ship. Next, she saw it descend and transform into a sphere with 4 legs and designs inscribed on its surface, from which she now sensed a single intelligence. In the third permutation, the object rose up and turned into a gray-black sphere with antennae, but no legs. I remember the dark gunmetal gray globe with antennae, she described, having an intelligent awareness of me, which its attention came full on me. It took me over, and there was nothing but me and it. Its physical force was like a huge wind without noise pushing against me. When I said hello, it was pleased. It responded to me. When its attention came on me, I was its sole interest. It was focusing entirely and completely on me. That's a good place to take a break. Forever 8.
You're going to try, go all the way. Otherwise, don't even start. If you are going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.
Take it slow. Are you searching?